This week on the Gifts of Trauma podcast.
Exposure to porn is happening at a younger and younger age. I was first exposed to porn at the age of 5.
Males are more likely to be exposed to pornography at an earlier age and to use pornography alone, while research indicates that women are more likely to consume pornography in order to please their partner by consuming it together.
It's perfect for men because it can be done anonymously, privately, and it's available in a wide diversity.
Research found a significant relationship between mental health and pornography use, including behaviors reflecting addiction.
What that means is that for men who are already traditionally conditioned to avoid their emotions and not speak about their mental health, well, they can consume this substance, this consumption in private and not have to share it with anyone. So it just perpetuates that solitude. It perpetuates bottling things up.
A study found that 11% of men compared to 3% of women resonated with the statement, "I am addicted to pornography."
We were already having an intervention simply by giving these men who had been conditioned to hide this consumption in shame, not just porn, but mental health concerns in general, was to speak about them. Growing up as a man, the indirect or very direct way that I was taught and raised to relate to my experiences, to my emotions, was to not speak about them. Beneath the surface are these very similar core beliefs. These very similar core beliefs of fundamental lack, fundamental not enoughness. It's not about blame. It's not our fault that these programs have been installed and programmed into our nervous system, whether they're intergenerational, whether they're from the womb, whether they're from childhood, whether they're simply spiritual and cosmic in nature. We didn't put them there. But it is our personal responsibility. No one else is going to be able to unravel them for us. No one else is going to be able to look inward and do that work.
Porn addiction distorts our perception of healthy relationships, robbing us of the ability to truly connect with our partners on a profound level.
Because of my inability to connect on a real human level, because I didn't know how to, I was never taught how to, I didn't even know what an emotion was until I turned 30. Porn was my band-aid for these experiences that I was avoiding experientially. So it was protecting me. At the core of it, porn was protecting me, just like any substance, behavior, consumption, addiction, whatever label the mind wants to use. At the core of it, it's protecting us from an experience.
So somebody carrying a belief, this "I'm not good enoughness," how do they show up in the world?
I could be with my mates and all of a sudden there's a woman in the periphery and my attention goes there. And it's not by choice. It's like an automatic impulse and drive and a compulsion. And all of a sudden I'm turning on charisma. All of a sudden I'm turning on charm. I'm peacocking. I'm doing these things. And I'm like, there's this thing that is expressing itself. And now I'm seeking to achieve it and attain it through a person. And it's not just the sex, it's the validation and the faux connection, this fake experience of connection, the short-lived, fleeting experience of connection that I was getting from these interactions.
So for anyone listening to this saying, hang on, I do that. And for anyone thinking, I'm ready to move away from that, or I would like to move away from that, how do they do that?
This is the Gifts of Trauma podcast, stories of transformation and healing through compassionate inquiry.
I'm really delighted. I'm really grateful. I'm really happy to have with me today on the show, Mr. Luke Sniewski. Luke.
I'm so excited to have this conversation and dive into whatever corners we end up taking this conversation. Maybe some dark, shadowy corners. Those will be fun.
Let's see where we go. Look, I wonder, would you be happy? I mean, I know you well. I know your work. I've had the privilege of learning from you and working with you. But for the listeners, would you like to take a few moments and introduce yourself in whichever manner or fashion feels appropriate to you right now?
My name is Luke Sniewski. My accent's from California. My last name's from Poland. That's why it's a little tricky for you to pronounce there, Kevin. And I'm presently living in New Zealand. So I've been in New Zealand for the last 10 years or so. This is where my home is, where my heart is. My son lives here. That's why I moved here. I'm a well-being coach and a somatic therapist. So I help people connect to their bodies. And I'm also a compassionate inquiry facilitator, mentor, and practitioner. So I blend a little bit of everything to help people connect to themselves, connect to the body so that, they experience more vitality, authenticity. They're more alive. They can live their life rather than being stuck in their heads.
Tell me a little bit more. How do you do that? That's what you do?
Well, it's really about exploring. Well, practices are one aspect of it. What are exploring, guiding, facilitating practices that help a person to pay attention to and pay attention to what they feel, but also to help them understand what they're actually paying attention for. Oftentimes people think, I don't feel anything, I don't feel anything, but they're actually in contact with experiences and sensations that they may not like and they may be averse to, that they want to otherwise avoid, but that is a feeling. And to really help a person have a little more clarity about what it means to be connected to their body. Because when we are more connected to the body, we're more present, we're more attentive to what's actually happening in front of us. And it allows us to be a little more authentic and responsive to our everyday lived experience rather than being, again, stuck in our heads, stuck in our imaginations, ruminating on the past or worrying about the future. So the body is this beautiful phenomenon, this beautiful experience that's happening right now. So as soon as we start paying attention to our body, we are just that much more present.
I noticed as you were speaking there, I just wanted to take a deep breath. It made me want to pay attention to my body. So
isn't the breath magical? Isn't the breath magical? It's the pathway to the present moment, to the body, because what's doing the breathing? So when you said you wanted to, you took a breath, you literally connected to your body in that moment. So yeah, just wanted to highlight
thank
that.
you for that. So that's the what. That's what you do. You spoke a little bit of how you do that. Maybe the obvious question is to ask you, why? Why do you do what you do?
I learned from my own lived experience what it means to be stuck in my own head. When I was perpetually engaging life through the lens or through the beliefs and interpretations and fears and worries and anxieties that were sort of dominating my mental landscape, I realized quite quickly how my actual life and the relationships within it slowly eroded, deteriorated, and were destroyed. So I learned and I witnessed what happens when we start paying attention to the present moment. And I noticed that my life and all of the relationships within it became more meaningful. There was more joy and peace and content. There was less discord, less stress, less chaos. And as soon as I woke up to that reality of what life could be like, I started witnessing and noticing that, wow, a lot of the suffering that I'm seeing around me within the lives of people that are crossing my path is very much related to this way of being stuck in one's own head. And so why? Because nothing has really given me more meaning, purpose, and fulfillment than witnessing that process of someone waking up to the wonder and awe of life, of their own relationships, to see appreciation grow in droves when people realize how much juiciness and aliveness is available to us from moment to moment, rather than perpetually worrying about tomorrow or the next day or 10 years from now, whatever it may be. And to also, I think that's also allowed or supported me in being able to have a deeper sense of empathy and understanding for that experience, because I know how automatic it's a complete default way of being. We don't even know that we're living in this way. And when we're able to be that calm presence for someone else and model that and guide someone back to that, it's quite profound to witness someone saying that, having that aha moment, that holy shit moment, that, wow, I didn't realize that this is what it could be like, that I didn't realize that I could have this kind of experience, this in-depth of an experience within my own life. So why do I do it? It's for moments like that.
Yeah, thank you. Look, and I noticed when you described the why, watching your body and your eyes and your face, not that I'm suggesting you would tell a lie, but I can certainly see that your body recognized that you were telling the truth because you lit up. Your voice lit up, your eyes lit up, your body lit up.
Yeah.
And it was really beautiful to watch.
Well, coming from a past of being an accountant and then a health and wellness professional, which was solely focused on the physical form, to be able to meet the world and meet people in this way is just wildly fulfilling. And to be able to share like you do as well, to know that this is the way that we get to navigate the lived experience and be able to earn a living is just quite fun, for lack of a better term. It's just amazing, really.
Fun's a great term.
Yeah.
Fun's a great term for that, yeah. Look, I'd love to pick something out of what you've just said and help me just remember to quote you correctly. I think you said the fears and beliefs that dominated your life.
Yeah.
Tell me about those. What were the fears and beliefs that dominated your life?
I think they might be some universally held beliefs, but maybe the listener will be able to decide. But the palpable sense of not enoughness, of not being good enough, and this unavoidable fear that was at the core of most of my decisions, but I wasn't consciously aware of it until I really allowed myself to dive in, that I would be abandoned, that I would be left alone, that I was abandonable. And so those beliefs colored and painted sort of the external manifestation or representation of my life. But when I journeyed inward and found that, yeah, I was able to navigate life a bit differently without those always grabbing the sort of the steering wheel. It's not to say that those beliefs aren't still present. It's not to say that those beliefs disappear. I don't think I'd want them to, and we can talk about that later. But to become aware of how these unconscious processes, these unconscious beliefs, and these emotions that we may not be consciously aware of, how they are driving all our decision making. Once we become aware of that, we might create a little space for choice. And that's an empowering space to be able to choose whether or not this belief or this emotion is going to govern how I engage with this present moment experience.
I'd love to park that. So I want to ask you more questions about beliefs, and I want to ask you more questions about the origins of those beliefs that presented themselves in your life, that dominated your life. Look, would it be okay to take a bit of a segue? I'm very keen to chat about the work that you do around male porn addiction.
Yeah.
You know, acknowledging I've had several addictions, but porn hasn't been one of them. So I'm probably coming here with all the misconceptions, the stereotypes of porn addiction. And I'd love you to help me understand it. You know, when we think about the misconceptions around alcohol addiction, we think of street drinkers drinking out of brown paper bags, sleeping on park benches. When we think of the misconceptions around drug use, we think of the same. You know, we think of hardcore street drug users. And I'm guessing there's probably the same misconceptions around porn addiction. You know, we kind of think of perverts or seedy men crawling around red light districts in certain cities with a brown hat on and an overcoat with the collar pulled up. You know, we probably think of those misconceptions. So for someone that doesn't know, tell me some truths about porn addiction.
Well, I suppose we can have a bit of a conversation on porn addiction that will, you said you parked a subject for later conversation. Maybe we'll be able to integrate all of this into a single conversation. So my interest in porn addiction arose during my PhD research. There's a saying out there that it's called PhD me search. So oftentimes people begin to dive in deeply into understand aspects of their own lived experience. So yes, I was addicted to porn, and I wouldn't say, again, that word porn addiction doesn't actually exist in the literature. So there's no actual scientific thing as porn addiction. The research focused on the problematic relationship with porn. So the research participants that came in were those who identified as having a problematic relationship with porn. So the key in that is that person was engaging in the behavior and they were experiencing some kind of life consequences leading to more suffering and discomfort, essentially. And this is probably true of all addictions, that no one's going to admit they're an addict until that substance or that consumption reaches a level that it's also impacting other areas of their life. And with porn, it's a very unique consumption because it's very different than alcohol, cigarettes, and other things where the human body might wear the addiction. In other words, there are certain physiological consequences to alcohol or smoking. You might smell the cigarette smoke on someone's body. They might discolor teeth. Again, different physical consequences to the different consumptions, whereas porn is largely psychological. And for many men, especially in modern times, exposure to porn is happening at a younger and younger age. And I was first exposed to porn at the age of 5.
Wow.
At a great age for it to start truly impacting on my sexual scripts of what sex meant, of how sex is supposed to be engaged in, on the expectations of what the male-female dynamic should look like. So it began distorting how I was relating to feminine energy. And that is something that, guess what? It's hidden until someone gets in the bedroom, right? All of a sudden, then maybe you might be able to see what's revealed is the impact of pornography on that person based on how they might engage with the act of sex. Is that making sense?
Completely. Yeah, completely. Yeah.
And so for actually all, let's say all, actually it is all, for all the participants that came forward, they only came forward because they self-identified with having that problematic relationship with porn. And across the board, every single one of them, there's a few consistencies. And one of them was that this was the first time that they had spoken openly to anyone about their porn use. And this was true for all but maybe 2 of them. And what wasn't anticipated was that this interview process, this introductory interview, was going to be therapeutic. I was an academic at the time. In many ways, I was still a counselor therapist, but the way I was showing up was shelved so I can engage in a scientific academic process. At the end of these interviews, which were largely question answer, I was receiving handshakes and thanks of gratitude and gestures, and later on emails. Oh, wow, I really felt that this is my first step away from porn. This is my way out of it. I've never been able to speak openly and honestly with anyone about this issue. And what I realized was before we even got to the intervention phase of the research, we were already having an intervention simply by giving these men who had been conditioned to hide this consumption in shame, not just porn, but mental health concerns in general, right? So growing up as a man, the indirect or very direct way that I was taught and raised to relate to my experiences, to my emotions, was to keep them quiet, was to shut them down, was to not speak about them. Crying is bad.
I was going to pause you just there. Look, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
I'm really loving this thread, and I'm sorry if you were just about to touch on it, but tell me where you learned that. Tell me where you learned that, I had to shut these emotions down. You were about to say crying was bad, but who taught you that?
Whether it was direct or indirect, it's the result of an environment. So imagine growing up. I was a first generation immigrant, Polish immigrant. I was the first person in my family born outside of Eastern Europe, outside of Poland. And I'm sure some of my descendants were Ukrainian, Russian, or whatever it may be, but Poland for sure. And so here my mom is pregnant, traveling across the world to start a new life as a result of political asylum and escaping the government rule in Poland during the 80s. There's a thing called the March for Solidarity, which is essentially the working class rebelling against the norms there. And my father was one of the ringleaders of said revolution. So he was given the ultimatum or the choice of life in prison or get the hell out of the country. And so he and my mother and my brother, they all had to sacrifice their Polish passports and they got political asylum. And of all the places to land, they landed in Sacramento, California. So here's this first generation immigrant family starting life over with the support of, the social support provided by the US government. And, it was about survival. And my father grew up in a military household. His father was in the army. So there comes that indoctrination around emotions. So I'm growing up in this harsh, stern Eastern European household. Emotions, boys don't cry, emotions aren't allowed. And there's very little room for authentic expression to emerge from a child, not just a boy, but also from a girl as well. But I didn't have any sisters, so I didn't see it firsthand. But it's just the Eastern European harshness that I'm sure many listeners would be able to relate to. So this is where you learn these things. And again, it's not told. Maybe sometimes it was told, you know, being scolded for crying, being hit for crying, being yelled at for whatever it may be, for displaying emotion, quit your crying, whatever it may be. But it certainly was learned through the environment and the interactions that I would have had with my parents.
You know, for anyone listening, for a child that, and maybe someone can relate, I would imagine lots of people can relate. And by the way, we used to get told, I'll give you something to cry about.
Yeah.
That was the instruction we got. What does that child start to believe about themselves? So what's formulating early in that child's life? How are they understanding themselves?
There it is. Then we start the I am wrong, or something's wrong with me. I am bad. I'm fundamentally bad. I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. I'm unlovable. And so, and even though on the surface, everyone's life looks either subtly or vastly different, beneath the surface are these very similar core beliefs. These very similar core beliefs of fundamental lack, of fundamental not enoughness. And if we move through life with these beliefs unaddressed, then guess what happens? We pass those beliefs on to the next generation. And this is also not a finger pointing or some activity or exercise of blame. My parents were struggling to survive, to create a new life. At the very core of their motivations was creating a better life for me and my brother. It's interesting, it's shocking, it's surprising that here's this intention of creating a better life, but as a consequence of being unconscious to the drivers that are driving that, we're actually perpetuating the very same mechanisms that are keeping them stuck in a state of despair, of depression, of sadness, of loneliness, of fear, of anxiety, whatever it may be.
So tell me then, look, and maybe help our listeners understand someone that's carrying that belief. So you've described beautifully your childhood and the difficulties there. And so somebody carrying a belief, this I'm not good enoughness, which is a lovely way to describe it. How do they show up in the world? What might someone recognize in themselves? They might say, that's how I show up in the world. How does someone show up in the world who carries that belief about themselves?
You know, there isn't a universal, but I will say that every one of us, like I said, we all may be carrying similar, very closely related core beliefs, but how they manifest, how they express, and how we respond to them is going to be different for everybody. Some people may, as you said, may send them down a path of complete self-destruction. They may be in the streets, as you described, and as a classic interpretation, representation of addiction, which is inaccurate and incorrect. I might have been on the street doing drugs and slowly and very fast, very quickly, actually, moving towards essentially destroying the health of my body and ending my own life in some way. For me, it was the opposite. I was an overachiever and a hard worker. So for me, if I believe myself to be fundamentally lacking, and I did believe myself to be fundamentally lacking and not good enough, well, then I was going to work my ass off and make myself worthy of love and make myself useful and make myself lovable through the acquisition and attainment of achievements in sports. I was a professional football player, academics, getting great grades, pushing myself, collecting women as trophies because, of course, female validation felt good. And that was a sense of connection that substituted for authentic intimacy. Porn, again, all these different ways of trying to fill a void that is unfillable through external pursuits. So maybe someone listening might say, well, how do I know if this is me or not? It starts with the simple question of why. So for me, I got curious why certain things kept happening on repeat. That might be a sign that we're beginning to wake up. If we start noticing that we change careers, and here we go, the same challenges I was facing there are happening now, whether it's a new career, a new job, a new workspace, whether it's a new relationship. Why do I keep finding myself in a similar relational dynamic? Why does this keep happening to me? That line has been repeated by or thought of by a lot of listeners. When we start getting curious about the why, that's the beginning of the journey, because that's when we stop looking externally and trying to solve our challenges or avoid our discomfort through external pursuits. We pause, we take that attention inward, and we start going backwards. And we might go backwards into time. We might go backwards very, very far back into time, right? So I spoke of my childhood, but that's not where the trauma began, right? Or quote unquote trauma. That's not when the conditioning may have been imprinted on my nervous system to respond to this world in this way. Let's consider the possibility that this started in the womb. I was born 2 months premature. I was less than 1 kg of total body weight. I fit in the palm of a human being's hand. That's how tiny I was. I had to be in an incubator for 2 weeks without any human touch. What would it be like for a child to be evicted from their comfortable home that early on? What was my mother's body? What were the physiological signals and chemicals that were being fed to me? How would my nervous system respond to that environment? To leave that womb 2 months early, to be in an incubator isolated from the world for 2 weeks without any touch. My guess is that that would have heavily imprinted when I think of my own trust issues and my inability to trust others, my inability to trust intimate partners, and that belief that I had to work through. How closely related are those present day challenges, or those challenges that I went through, when I look at that origin story of how this body came into the world? We can go farther back. If we really want to talk about the close relatedness of all our core beliefs, how traumatic of an experience must it be to go from infinite potential, infinite possibility of infinite wholeness and oneness and get condensed down to one single human form? That would be traumatic in and of itself. To go from infinite everythingness, oneness of the oneness of the universe, and to get sucked down into a body. Is it surprising that we believe we're not enough? Because we have a sense, there's a part of us that knows where we come from. There's a part of us that knows, but there's more than this. Of course there is. But here we are choosing, a part of us is also choosing to have this dual experience. And of course we're going to, to me, it seems inescapable and almost a rite of passage to become aware of those core beliefs of fundamental not enoughness, of abandonment, of loneliness. When we're able to touch those, integrate those beliefs, then we can authentically enjoy and experience this dual way of living, this human form, this life. I guess we went a little off topic, but it seemed connected as we're tracing back the origins of our trauma, the origins of these beliefs.
And I can see, look, that it's another very exciting topic for you. I can see that you're very inspired to talk about it, which is beautiful. There was something you did there, look, and I just want to highlight it. And then, I'd like to move forward again into your choice and your choice of work, and you described earlier your choice of, I'm going to use the word solving these core beliefs. We'll maybe choose a different word in a minute. But when you started to talk about when we start to look at ourselves, so we turn around, we look inward. I was about to pause you and add a caveat of, and this is where the work starts. This is the difficult part of looking at ourselves. And I like then how you very quickly took the blame away from that. So there's no sense that we're blaming someone for their core belief. There's no sense that we're blaming someone for their addiction, for their porn addiction, or whatever addiction. There's no sense that we're blaming their parents for how that landed for them. But I just wanted to talk or mention that this work of healing trauma, we use words awaken, enlighten, liberation, which come with these ideas of sparkles and rainbows and sunshine, and that's not the truth. So it can be dark and difficult and hard, but ultimately leads to liberation. So for you, when did that happen for you? When did you decide, okay, I'm at the tipping point, I need to look inwards? Was it a book? Was it a movie? What was the tipping point for you?
My son being born, that, and witnessing yet another relationship that fell victim to a 2-year cycle of unconscious reactivity. And it was the final time that I was going to allow myself, why does this keep happening to me? And I don't know what it was. I don't know if it's divine intervention, but all I knew was that when my son was born and being separated from him for, it was 2 or 3 months, two or 3 months that I was separated from him because of the end of the relationship with his mother, I knew that nothing else mattered except being in his life. So it required me to start taking responsibility and getting curious about these reactions. What was driving this? Because as you said, it's not about blame. It's not our fault that these programs have been installed and programmed into our nervous system, whether they're intergenerational, whether they're from the womb, whether they're from childhood, whether they're simply spiritual and cosmic in nature. We didn't put them there. But it is our personal responsibility. No one else is going to be able to unravel them for us. No one else is going to be able to look inward and do that work. And I like that word, awakening. It's like turning on the light in a dark room. All of a sudden there's light in the room, but guess what you see when you take a look inside? You're like, holy crap, this is a little messier than I thought. There's a lot more here than I had bargained for. And that process of cleaning up, that's the work. So the intellectual acceptance and understanding is nice. Like it's, oh yeah, I want to be more mindful. Everyone wants to be more mindful. Everyone wants to be able to observe, accept, and respond to their present moment experience. But without practice, as soon as we get triggered, as soon as we get stressed, we fall right back into the same reactions that have been embedded and encoded in our nervous system from its formation. So yeah, for me, it was witnessing my son. My son was born, and his first breaths were essentially on my chest. My son's first waking moments are on my chest, and I'm witnessing this human being, and something woke in me. Something said, nothing matters. This is it. This is what's going to be my driving force for maturing, for being a different, better person. And in fact, what's interesting is the blame shifted through my son, because I was able to see the hatred, resentment, and anything negative that I had towards my father, being able to witness myself through my son's eyes and my father through my eyes, to see that dynamic, I was able to have forgiveness, empathy, and understanding of my father's lived experience, to see what he was and continues to hold, as we all do, to understand what is motivating and driving his decisions from a space of compassion and understanding rather than judgment and resentment. And none of that is possible. Again, the catalyst, it was my son. It's that simple.
Thank you. I'm noticing a timeline there. Look, so we spoke about early life. You move into California and your house and how difficult that was. We talked about the formation or the early formation of core beliefs and this not good enoughness. I asked you to speak a little bit about how that might show up in someone, and you did that beautifully, these repeating patterns. And we jumped then to what seemed to be the catalyst for deciding to change, deciding to get help or work on yourself or turn inwards. But there's maybe a piece missing in there, in that, given that we're having a conversation about porn addiction and you spoke about your own, and maybe you want to do this, speaking personally or about maybe people you've worked with, where did you learn or how did you decide that the way to solve the pain of carrying the belief of not good enough was through porn?
Well, because I was introduced to porn at such an early age, I realized quite quickly that it gave me an experience physiologically and mentally that I didn't really have access to in my everyday life. This faux sense of connection and relief. So when my life was pretty shit, I would quickly be able to escape it with porn. And the interesting thing about porn is that it's perfect for men because it can be done anonymously, privately, and it's available in a wide diversity. So what that means is that for men who are already traditionally conditioned to avoid their emotions and not speak about their mental health, well, they can consume this substance, this consumption in private and not have to share it with anyone. So it just perpetuates that solitude. It perpetuates bottling things up. What prompted me to begin looking at porn was there were some readings and articles and books, but what really sparked it was when I began investigating and inquiring into the pattern that was showing up in my relationships. I noticed that I would be able to be abstinent from porn for 6 to 8 months, whatever it may be, and especially at the beginning of a relationship. And at some point around the 6 month mark, after the pheromones and endorphins fade, and all of a sudden you have to be your real self and you have to communicate your authentic needs and really show up and be yourself, I wasn't able to do that. And because of my inability to connect on a real human level, because I didn't know how to, I was never taught how to. I didn't even know what an emotion was until I turned 30. My first therapist essentially introduced me to what an emotion was. In fact, Michael Brown's work, he introduced me to Michael Brown's work as well, the presence process, which I know that you're familiar with and I've done a few times as myself as well. In becoming aware of that and realizing, wait a second, having these epiphanies of, actually, I don't have any real friendships with women. Actually, I don't know how to relate to women other than as sexual objects. Actually, I'm always consumed by thoughts of sexual objectification as soon as there's anyone around me that my mind is perceived as sexually desirable or attractive.
Could I slow you down there? Look, that was fascinating. I would love to get you, if you can remember what you said, because it was a really interesting take on porn. And, in the society that we live in, and we might use the word toxic masculinity, you said a few things there, consumed by sexual thoughts whenever there's females in the space. Look, I guess if we were sitting with 100 men and asked them, how many of you might be consumed with sexual thoughts whenever females enter the room, I think we might get a lot of hands going up. I'm reflecting on what I said at the start. I have no experience with porn addiction. And if I was to ask myself that question, if you're telling me that a definition of porn addiction or moving in that direction is to have sexual thoughts when females enter a room, I'm not so sure I could keep my hand down. So maybe I'm going to ask you to talk. Maybe just put some more emphasis on that, because I think that's really important to define what porn addiction is.
Well, again, porn addiction is a definition that doesn't exist. But for me, when I realized that I wasn't okay with porn being in my life anymore, is when I realized its impacts and implications on my ability to connect with other human beings, specifically and mostly women, but this is also men. I could be with my mates and all of a sudden there's a woman in the periphery and my attention goes there. And it's not by choice. It's like an automatic impulse and drive and a compulsion. I could literally be present in my body. Certainly as I was moving away from porn, I could feel impulses that would move my body towards this human being. And all of a sudden, I'm turning on charisma. All of a sudden, I'm turning on charm. I'm peacocking. I'm doing these things. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm not even doing this. There's this thing that is just expressing itself in the hopes of achieving this thing that porn gives me through a screen. And now I'm seeking to achieve it and attain it through a person. And then to get this short-lived experience of validation that is completely one-sided, that isn't representative of what a sexual, not even exchange, what a sexual expression might look like within a healthy relationship where there's a mental, physical, and emotional connection, where it's across the board. That is what I became, wait a second, this isn't okay. I am not okay with this. And I knew, in fact, when I chose to move away from porn, it wasn't just porn, because every time I'd quit porn in the past, and I'd been successful for, like I said, 9 months, and then it felt great. And for some reason, even since my early 20s, I knew that it wasn't right for my body and my mind. I knew that there was a part of me that was constantly seeking to move away from it. And I don't know where that came from, but I knew maybe it was religious in nature. I have no idea. I really don't know where the impulse to move away from it was. But when I was able to finally move away from it is when I went completely celibate. And I knew that if I'm not seeking it from a screen, I also cannot seek it from casual encounters. I cannot seek it from women. And it's not just the sex, it's the validation and the faux connection, this fake experience of connection, the short-lived, fleeting experience of connection that I was getting from these interactions. And it was during that 9 months. And it wasn't like, I'm going to be celibate for X amount of time. I just said, I'm going to be celibate for as long as it takes for me to find someone or some experience that's different than what I'm used to. In other words, I'm going to know it's time to break when I meet someone that I'm mentally, physically, emotionally connected with, not just this physical impulse to pounce. And for the first couple of weeks, here comes this experience of going completely celibate. Every single time in the first 2 weeks, it was quite often. The next 2 weeks was quite hard. And then after about a month, it sort of just dissolved and diminished and disappeared altogether. Every time I experienced an impulse to move towards porn, I would check in. I would attempt to feel like, where is this craving originating from in my body? I would attempt to find it, to find the very core, to take my attention and go to the very center of it and stay there. And I would ask myself a series of questions. These are my questions. Someone else's questions may be different if they decide to do such a reflective process with.
Look, can I pause you again? I'm really, because I'm sitting here listening to you and it's fascinating. And I have some experience of mindfulness and meditation and that type of thing. But when I hear you talk about, I'm identifying the epicenter of this sensation in my body and I'm going there.
Mhm.
Maybe to you and I, we can talk about this and understand it. You know what you're talking about, obviously. And I have a fair idea of what you're talking about, but that's not normal practice to be able to identify this epicenter of the sensation in my body and go there and stay there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you stretch that out a little bit? Can you stretch that out and talk maybe a little bit more? Because the question I want to know is, for anyone who is experiencing this idea of, I can feel my body being pulled towards a female. You use terms like peacocking, turning on charm.
Yes.
When I hear that, look, I'm kind of thinking, that's a lot of men that I know. That's when I go to a lot of places. That's a lot of the behavior that I see. I'm almost thinking that is, I want to, do air quotes and say normal male behavior. So for anyone listening to this saying, hang on, I do that. And for anyone thinking, I'm ready to move away from that, or I would like to move away from that, my question was, how do they do that? And you're now in the process of describing it.
Yeah, I'll stretch it up. I'll do my best to also unpack it in this way. So for me, the way that I might conceptualize it that makes it a little maybe more accessible, maybe a little more practical, is that our present moment experience, what's happening to us is like two sides of a coin. The coin is our experience, but on one side of the coin are the thoughts we're having about what's happening. And on the other side of the coin, we have the felt sense, the felt experience, whether it's an emotion or whether it's an actual physical sensation in the body, like a tension or a pain or a discomfort or a vibrating or a pulsing or something. And what tends to happen is that when we are stuck in this automatic loop of seeking consumptions in order to avoid, numb, or soothe an internal experience, we're looking on one side of the coin only, and that's our thought. And the thought comes in that says, hey, porn is nice. And so then we automatically go towards porn, or hey, she's attractive, and then all of a sudden we're envisioning and we're going towards that external object, that external thing. If we flip the coin around and we pause and say, wait a second, if something's happening here, something is definitely and assuredly also happening here in the body. And so when we do take our attention inward, what we begin to sense over time, and sometimes it isn't automatic, sometimes it isn't the first time, but what we begin to notice over time is that there is a location to this experience. It might be a certain part of the body. If we close our eyes, we may not be able to locate specifically, but we have a sense of where it is within our awareness. It's somewhere. And when I say go to the very center of it, what I'm really saying is, rather than noticing it and running away from it and distracting ourselves from it, when I say try to find the center of it, it's just a nice way of saying stay with it, lean in, go get curious about what happens when you stay with it. And if we do try to penetrate literally with our attention and our awareness, we can try to find the very core of the experience, which sometimes can be experienced as a little more intense. And that would be understandable, because if we've spent most of our lived experience avoiding these sensations and these emotions, when we invite ourselves to lean in, what tends to happen is we come into contact with an experience that's, holy shit, this is uncomfortable. I didn't know this is what I was going to be feeling. And if I'm going to come, is it okay if I now pivot back to where I left off? Because it could be, these questions may be helpful.
Sure.
It's in those moments of staying with that where my 4 questions were, what am I angry about? What am I sad about? What am I stressed about? What issue am I not confronting in my life? And I think those four essentially. I would ask myself those four questions, and I would pause after each one. And every single time there was an answer. And every single time that I was able to stay with it, there was a palpable discharge, not just simply like a fading away. Sometimes there was like a twitch and a quiver and shivers through my body. Sometimes it was touching immense pain and tears came out as I was able to touch the thing that I was actually sad about, that I was avoiding. So what I came to realize was actually porn was my band-aid for these experiences that I was avoiding experientially. So it was protecting me. At the core of it, porn was protecting me, just like any substance, behavior, consumption, addiction, whatever label the mind wants to use. At the core of it, it's protecting us from an experience. And so as I was able to touch that experience, two things happened. Firstly, I never had to quit porn because I became intently focused on the experience that was driving porn. So I never had to tell myself, okay, stop using porn, stop using porn. I never had to white knuckle it, because when my attention went that way, all of a sudden, as I reconciled the experiences that were driving and motivating the porn use, all of a sudden the need for porn disappeared. So I don't think I ever quit porn. It just evaporated. It disappeared. And this is the difference between someone willpowering change and someone surrendering to the process and getting curious, showing compassion, non-judgment, exploring. All of the qualities, all of the things that we as facilitators, you and I, Kevin, we teach in CI, all the foundational components of CI are relevant right here. As we turn inward towards this part, recognize it for the protection that it is and was, and go in and stay with it, be curious with it, explore it. And all of a sudden, its need to express and protect in that way dissipates and disappears. So for me, it was never quitting. It was simply getting curious about what's here beneath it. And in fact, I said celibacy lasted 9 months. It lasted 9 months. And I knew that when I came into contact with this nervous system after 9 months, this new unique experience, it was completely different. There was no impulse to pounce. There was no impulse to dominate. There was no drive to impress. And it was just eye contact, just presence, a softness, a welcoming, a connection. I'm like, oh, I've never experienced this in my life. And I knew in that moment, something I didn't know I was looking for, something I had no idea how to find. Oh, there it is. And I knew. And it was actually, and this is the truth, it was my first real relationship in my life. After 30 some odd years of living, it was the first time I was actually in relationship with someone. And it didn't last forever, and it didn't need to. It lasted as long as it needed to. And it was a conscious end between two conscious individuals, both learning what they needed to learn from each other. But it was the first time that I was able to meet and to know someone deeply and intimately, and I allowed myself to be known deeply and intimately. And so what a great foundation to work with. And I'm like, wow, why would I ever go back to this faux connection that porn was providing, which is only a physical, visual experience, when all of a sudden I got not just a tease, a sample, I got this is what connection can feel like. This is what sex can feel like. This is what sex can be, this full embodied experience. It can be as awakening as a deep meditation.
You described that beautifully, and I'm going to pull you back just a little bit again.
Go for it. Go for it. You're good at this.
For me, when I'm listening to you, it sounds beautiful, and I still think for Joe Punter out on the street that's having these experiences that you're talking about around women, and we might just add, this isn't a heterosexual thing, by the way, that this is across all genders and how people define themselves. And when you're talking, I'm guessing that you had some level of experience to be able to do this for yourself. And I don't know if that's the truth, some level of knowledge or some experience of mindfulness or meditation. Or so what does the guy that's going to the pub 4 nights a week, peacocking as you described it, being drawn to women, living in this normalized toxic male culture, that's deciding he'd like to do something about this, what is his first move? Does he speak to someone? Does he read something? What does he do?
Absolutely. Speaking to someone, I would say, is number one. And the reason for that is quite simple. Until we are well resourced enough individually and we have tools and resources to pull from, we're being thrown into the deep end if we decide to face this. This reactivity is so deeply embedded, we have no idea how strong it is. Well, as soon as we have the intention for change, and this probably relates to all listeners, as soon as we have an intention for change, we set a New Year's resolution. As soon as we move in that direction, we get bulldozed by our reactivity, and those intentions for change don't last very long because we're not resourced within ourselves. So having that external support, a therapeutic relationship with someone that is able to hold space and empower the person to explore themselves, empower them to cultivate a sense of agency and autonomy, that is absolutely a key first step. Concurrently, however, there are practices that we can put into place. And you asked me, well, what did I have into place? Well, this is why I don't judge my beliefs of not enoughness, because man, there's a lot in my life I can thank for because of that belief. One of those is this quality of determination. That doesn't come for me specifically from my own lived experience without the belief of not being good enough, because I had to be determined to move away from that. And I was able to take those same quality skills and strengths that have emerged from the beliefs that were actually limiting my lived experience and my expression of life. And I could take those qualities and apply them to other practices. So it was quite helpful at the beginning to have that determination to lean on as I began personal practices like exercise, like eating healthy food, and then it slowly grew outward, like taking care of my tissue through massage and tissue release, like meditation and breath work. And it kept growing, like dancing, like sauna, like ice bath. And now I have a toolkit that I lean on. I'm resourced. So yes, my primary intention is and always will be to, can I feel it? Can I hold this pain as if I'm visualizing a small child, as if I'm visualizing myself passing through this experience? Can I hold myself, that infant, that newborn who's an incubator, who's having a tremendously stressful experience, imagining that and saying, I'm here and I can hold you. But I'm also human. And I know that sometimes that's not always possible. Sometimes I can lean on my resources, and whether that's reaching out to a friend or leaning on the practices that I've cultivated over the years, I have something that can help me pass through that experience. I think you can relate. Meditation is surely and might likely end up being the number one choice for the rest of my life. I'm lucky enough to have stumbled upon it at all. Many people don't. So I'm lucky that I stumbled upon it. Maybe it could have been great having it earlier, but it showed up exactly when it needed to and turned on the light in my dark room exactly at the moment that it needed to happen.
Yeah, again, for our listeners, just putting this timeline together of not getting what you needed when you were small. So missing experiences. Through those missing experiences, creating and developing beliefs about yourself, the not enoughness. For me, that early thing was smoking weed, smoking hash, that thing that helped me with the not enoughness. For you, it was porn. For someone else, it might be whatever it is, food, gambling, alcohol, drugs,
Correct. Beautiful. It might be even money and success. Let's include those.
Money and exercise.
Yes.
Yeah. Work.
Thank you. Beautiful addition. Some of these consumptions are celebrated by society. So it's hard. Imagine how hard it is to face an addictive pattern or a problematic relationship with a substance or a consumption or this external object of some sort when we're being put on the cover of magazines and celebrated by the world for it. That's not easy to do.
We touched a little bit on this idea of toxic masculinity, and I think we, as two males sitting here, not that this is a blame game, but toxic masculinity, media, social media, etc., the world of work, and has a lot to answer for. But that timeline, look, then finding a method to soothe through porn, living through that, and then by what you said earlier, I didn't know what an emotion was until I was 30. So it was only after that age that you started this healing work, this awakening work, whatever we might call it. And the point I'm making is that for anyone listening who's going through that right now, it's possible. You can do this. You can do this after 30. You can do it after 50. You can do it. You can do it whatever. So for you, it wasn't until after you were 30, and you were well educated. You were successful, etc., etc. And it wasn't until after you were 30 that the penny dropped that I need to do some work.
And nothing else mattered after that moment. It became my sole focus. And I think that's that session with Graham Mead, my first counselor and teacher. I knew this is how I will be helping and supporting people in the future. And it took a few years of my own work until the universe, until life, until the world actually confirmed that I was ready to do the work. So it was through those invitations and the opportunities that presented themselves after I did that dirty work of going in there and actually exploring what was there.
Look, a final question, maybe just to help us land a little bit. The question I have for you, and I'm going to caveat it, if I may, and be really cheeky, and of course you can completely dismiss this caveat if you wish. Without talking about anything that you've talked about already in the time that you've been with me, if you could teach the world one thing, what would that be?
That beneath the surface of every behavior that we judge is a why that is rooted in self-protection and love. And if we can truly, truly acknowledge and appreciate that, then it completely shifts the way we relate to ourselves. Because where there's judgment and guilt, it perpetuates the behavior. And where there's compassion and acceptance, it allows for new possibilities to emerge and flourish.
Beautiful. That was beautiful. Luke Sniewski, I am delighted that you have spent some time with me. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you and watching you get excited about the things that you're passionate about. Look, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm very grateful that you came and chatted to us.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me.
The Gifts of Trauma is a weekly podcast that features personal stories of trauma healing, transformation, and the gifts revealed on the path to authenticity. Please note, this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for personal therapy or a DIY formula for self-therapy. We'd like to thank you for being here today, and we'd also like to thank our guests, as well as Gabor Mate, Sataram Kaur, and the Compassionate Inquiry admin team, marketing team, and podcast team. Please join us again next week to hear more stories of transformation and healing through Compassionate Inquiry.